The airfield is quiet now. Concrete runways stretch across the flat ground, cracked and stained by oil that has long since soaked in. At the far edge of the dispersal area, a large aircraft sits without movement. Its wings are broad, almost awkwardly so, casting a shadow that no longer serves a purpose. The engines are cold. The war has ended, but the machine remains, waiting for a decision that has already been made elsewhere. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered on May 7th, and across Britain, the Royal Air Force faced a question that had not existed during 6 years of total war. What to do with thousands of combat aircraft built for a conflict that no longer required them? Among these machines was Britain's very first four-engined heavy bomber to enter squadron service, the short Stirling. When the Stirling had first entered operational service back in August 1940, Britain was fighting for survival. The Battle of Britain was still raging. German forces controlled most of Western Europe. British strategic bombing doctrine was still experimental, evolving under immense pressure. The Stirling had been designed in the late 1930s to meet a specific Air Ministry requirement. It demanded a large payload and long range, but with one critical constraint: it had to fit inside existing hangars. That single limitation would define its entire career. By 1945, the strategic environment had completely changed. Britain now possessed newer, better heavy bombers, capable of higher altitudes, longer range, and greater flexibility. The Stirling, once a symbol of ambition, had become an aircraft with a limited future. It had a wingspan of 99 feet and 1 inch, and its length measured just over 87 feet. Powered by 4 Bristol Hercules radial engines, each producing around 1,375 horsepower, it had the power to lift heavy loads from short runways. Its maximum bomb load could reach an impressive 14,000 pounds under optimal conditions. Although operational loads were often lower, more than 2,300 Stirlings were produced between 1940 and 1945. The aircraft served primarily with RAF Bomber Command from 1941 to 1943, flying the early night bombing campaigns over Germany, targeted industrial cities, rail yards, and ports, carrying the fight to the enemy when few others could. However, a critical design limitation haunted its every mission: its operational ceiling. The Stirling struggled to fly above 16,000 feet when fully loaded. As German air defenses improved with better radar, flak cannons, and deadly night fighters, this low altitude placed its crews at an ever-increasing risk. By 1943, Bomber Command had little choice but to largely withdraw the Stirling from frontline strategic bombing roles. Its place was taken by the legendary Avro Lancaster and the Handley Page Halifax, both capable of operating at higher altitudes with even heavier bomb loads. But the Stirling did not disappear. Its role simply changed. From 1943 onward, the aircraft was increasingly used for mine-laying operations in enemy waters, a dangerous task known as gardening. It also found a new life as a powerful glider tug. Its large fuselage and strong structure made it perfectly suited to towing the huge Horsa and Hamilcar gliders, which carried troops, jeeps, and even light tanks. The Stirling played a major role in airborne operations, including the Normandy landings in June 1944 and the ill-fated Operation Market Garden in September of that year. It dropped paratroopers, towed gliders, and delivered heavy equipment right into the heart of the battle. By the time Germany surrendered, the Stirling had already been removed from most frontline bomber squadrons. It remained in service as a transport, glider, tug, and trainer. But peace changed everything. In 1945, the RAF faced severe financial and logistical pressures. Britain's economy was exhausted. War debts were enormous, and manpower had to be demobilized rapidly. The RAF operated tens of thousands of aircraft of all types. There was no budget, no need, and no political will to maintain such a vast wartime fleet. In this environment, the Stirling was particularly vulnerable. Its operational limitations were well known. Its design was already considered obsolete by late war standards. It required large crews, significant maintenance, and consumed valuable spare parts that were needed elsewhere. Post-war evaluations conducted by the Air Ministry were blunt. They concluded that the Stirling had no long-term future in Britain's strategic force. It was too slow for modern bombing doctrine. Its ceiling was inadequate against modern air defenses. Its range limited its usefulness in an emerging Cold War posture, which increasingly focused on long-distance deterrence. Unlike the Lancaster, which continued in service into the early Cold War and was adapted for roles like maritime patrol, the Stirling lacked a clear post-war mission. Its airframe wasn't easily adaptable for peacetime transport compared to newer designs. The burgeoning world of civil aviation favored pressurized cabins, higher cruising altitudes, and better fuel efficiency. The Stirling offered none of these. Beginning in late 1945, Stirlings were withdrawn from service at an accelerating pace. Squadrons were disbanded or re-equipped. The aircraft were flown to storage and disposal airfields across Britain, parked in long, silent rows, and left exposed to the weather while they awaited their final fate. Some were stripped of usable components like engines, instruments, and radios, but for most, the end was swift and final. By 1946 and 1947, the vast majority of surviving Stirlings were sold for scrap. A severe aluminum shortage during the immediate post-war period made scrapping economically attractive. The once mighty bombers were broken up on site or transported to dismantling facilities. Wings were cut away, fuselages were opened and crushed. Within just a few years, nearly all physical traces of the Stirling had vanished from RAF inventories. Only a handful avoided immediate destruction. Some were briefly used for instructional purposes at technical schools. Very small numbers served in civilian hands for experimental transport conversions. But these efforts were short-lived, and none proved commercially viable. By the early 1950s, the Stirling was effectively extinct as a flying aircraft. The complete absence of a preserved Stirling in a museum today is not an accident. Post-war Britain had little interest in memorializing its wartime machinery. Resources were desperately needed for reconstruction, housing, and industrial recovery. Museums were underfunded. And in the public memory, the Stirling was overshadowed by the more famous Lancaster. It simply wasn't prioritized for preservation. Historians today view the Stirling as a vital transitional aircraft. It represented Britain's first attempt to field a true four-engined heavy bomber at scale. Its shortcomings were the result of pre-war assumptions and constraints, particularly that hangar size requirement which limited its wingspan and doomed its altitude performance. But strategically, the Stirling mattered. It allowed Bomber Command to expand during the critical early years of the war, filling a gap when nothing else was available in sufficient numbers. It trained thousands of aircrew, established operational procedures, and carried the bombing campaign through its most vulnerable phase. In its later service as a glider tug directly supported the liberation of Europe. But in the post-war world, there was no place for compromised designs born of emergency. Military aviation was moving rapidly toward higher speed, greater altitude, and eventually jet propulsion. The Stirling belonged to a different bygone era. Today, nothing remains of Britain's thousands of Stirling bombers, except photographs, documents, and the occasional fragment recovered from a wartime crash site. Not a single complete aircraft survives anywhere in the world. The silence on those abandoned airfields has long since been broken by new construction, new aircraft, and new history. The concrete runways are still there in places, the dispersal bays still visible from the air. But the large, four-engined bomber that once struggled into the night sky is gone. Its purpose fulfilled, its limitations exposed, its end decided not by combat, but by peace. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more hidden histories from the world of aviation.